Your Humanities Half Hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hafadades and Tirawami. Welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we're talking about a grant project funded in part by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council. It's related to the civilian camps that were established here after the World War II invasion. And joining us today is the project director, Stephanie Soder. Stephanie, welcome to Your Humanities Half Hour.
Thank you.
And I have to say, welcome back to the Marianas, because this is not your first time here.
Correct. It is my second, and actually second this summer. So it's been kind of nice having all this time here on the island.
Wow, so maybe you got here, and then when you went back, you got over jet lag, and now you're back trying to get over jet lag.
Right. So I'll be good in 2 weeks, and then I'll have to go back home.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, what brought you here the first time?
The first time, I'm actually at East Carolina University, graduate student in North Carolina. And the first time I was here on a project funded by the DPAA. So we did diving projects looking at airplanes in Tannapeg Lagoon. And I was a crew chief on that, trying to teach the first-year graduate students. And while I was here, I was able to start doing my own research for my thesis, which is about the civilian internment camps. So kind of got a little bit of a toe in the water then, and then I had about a month at home, and now I'm back again to start up again.
And we do want to mention that in the week ahead, you'll be looking for more people to interview. So let's talk a little bit about what the grant is, the project is about. Can you describe to us, for those that are not familiar, the history of the civilian camps that were established in Saipan and Tinian?
Sure. So the first time, I guess, that the U.S. military came to the island was for the Battle of Saipan from June 15th to July 9th in 1944. And after the battle, there was basically nowhere for the civilians to go, so the U.S. military created these internment camps. One, it's called Camp Sasubi, and they put all of the civilians in these camps, including Japanese, Korean, Okinawan, and the indigenous Chamorro and Carolinian. Unfortunately, it was so cramped, overpacked. There was way too many people in the small amount of space that they had. So in October of 1944, they expanded into Chalankanoa village, and that one was specifically for the indigenous Chamorro and Carolinian to move out of Camp Sasubi and into the village that was still kind of intact. So there were still houses or buildings up from the Japanese administration that they were moved into. And they were put into these internment camps for 2 years, even after the end of the war in 1945, just because the U.S. was trying to figure out what exactly to do with Saipan and other islands in the Pacific. So after the United Nations was formed, they decided to make the Trust Territory the Pacific Islands and basically give the administration kind of back to the people, but also keep an eye on them. And then they were released on July 4th, 1946 from the camps.
And yesterday we celebrated a belated Liberation Day parade, this year on the 21st due to the storm. And a lot of people are still confused, thinking that Liberation Day was the day that the Americans invaded, but Liberation Day is actually the day we commemorate the closure of these camps. As you mentioned, they were closed in 1946. Yeah. Right. So a big part of your project, as I understand, is going to be interviewing some Chamorros and Carolinians or family members,
right,
about their experience. What types of things are you going to be looking at in these interviews?
Really, we just want to know what is important to the people and their families that was remembered from the camps. What is it important that is recorded into the historical record? The indigenous community has already done a great job recording their own stories. There's tons of books out about their experiences about the camp, but we just want to get a little deeper and further into it. So we're looking overall at what the experiences were, their relationship with the military, and specifically maritime activities. And since we know that's a big part of the indigenous culture, and my thesis as a maritime studies student will definitely focus on that maritime aspect as well.
Have you had an opportunity to do some preliminary study of these experiences that have already been shared, and what are you finding there?
People seem to be, very open about, at least the ones who have recorded their own histories. And some of the questions I asked kind of have been answered, but I'm just curious as to whether or not those are experiences by the individual, or the majority of people had those same experiences, especially with like the military, the relationship with them, and things like that. So what's in a shared experience versus individual experiences that we really want to know about.
So kind of broadening the collection to kind of see what comes out as commonalities.
Right. And we've heard that there are stories that some people just haven't spoken to anybody about or told, and
yes,
we really
that's true.
would love them to share, if they're comfortable with it, because these things should be recorded and known so that they can be passed on through the historic record.
Have you had experience with other projects where you've had to do oral histories?
I've done anthropological surveys, not so much oral histories, but talking to people about experiences that they've had, just modern, not in a historic level, technically.
I was just wondering if you're aware of like any ways, talking to people who may want to interview their family members who, as you said, are reluctant to share, like what are some of the ways that you can get them to open up so that we can record this history and make sure that it's not lost?
Yeah, and it is a sensitive topic for many people, so it is hard, but you definitely want to build up a rapport, and you have to be somebody that's trustworthy. And we have a couple of people, Genevieve Cabrera and Fred Camacho, that are locals who are like our local heritage consultants, and they've been great with contacting people, and so they build that trust from that contact first, and then they get to know me as a person, and hopefully they'll open up, and maybe they realize that those stories do need to be told. So hopefully I'm one of the people that they find trustworthy to open up to.
A lot of the pictures I've seen of the camps are people just maybe going into the camps, looking pretty destitute. But there was actually, I guess, in later months, a lot of activity going on inside the camp. They weren't always just sitting around, waiting for rations. And what are some of the things that were actually going on inside the civilian camps here in the Marianas?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the first pictures were them getting help, getting first aid, food, shelter, water, all the necessities. But then later, as the U.S. military was able to kind of get things rolling in the sense that they were able to build houses and build better areas, they started schooling again, so that the kids had, something to do during the day. Everybody, well, not everybody, but most people could get jobs, either non-skilled labor or skilled labor with the military, so people had things to do.
I can just imagine school, like one day you're learning Japanese, and 2 weeks later, or whenever they started the school, you're
having to learn English. Yeah, it was definitely, they had a huge changeover in administration and just everything else. They weren't supposed to speak Japanese, so they had to learn English, and I've heard from a couple people they learned from the military, like just their involvement with the military, that they picked it up that way. But it says something that they're very adaptable to the situation, and that they were able to survive through this. It's very impressive to me, just to hear these stories about people that had their whole lives changed and everything basically ripped away from them because there was indiscriminate shelling of the island, and they didn't have homes, and they were able to pull through this, and it's pretty amazing.
I understand that another thing you were hoping to look at was how the residents may have been involved in rebuilding the island with the military, and you mentioned there are some jobs. Like, what was going on there?
Yeah, there's plenty of labor jobs, so construction and things like that. Some people were employed by the military for administrative duties, like secretaries and clerks and things like that. There were seamstresses, and then there was a handy shop on the island that the indigenous would make little boats and other little handy shops that the military would buy. I would love to have seen
what they were making then.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of examples of it at the CNMI Museum. I was there last month for a soft opening, and they had a couple, and I was taking pictures.
Was one of them a doll or something?
I believe so. Yeah. I think they still have that one. I just remember the boat because I thought that was so cool that they weren't allowed to build at least from what I gather, they're not really allowed to build full-size boats, but so they made it into a little handicraft. So they were still kind of pulling that maritime tradition, even though they weren't supposed to be outside the camp building boats.
I want to talk a little bit more about that in the second half of our show, but I want to ask, how did you get interested in this particular topic?
I have always been really interested in World War II, and I was actually in Asia a couple of years ago, so I found the Asia-Pacific culture very interesting as well. So I was talking with Dr. Jennifer McKinnon. She's my advisor at East Carolina University, and at that point she had just edited a book about the Battle of Saipan, and she's like, read my book and see if there's any holes. So I started reading it, and it was mentioned very briefly that the civilians were put into internment camps, but that was kind of it. And it was a maritime, archaeology book, so I was kind of like, oh, okay, I guess they just didn't have room for it there. So I looked into that more and realized that there's no real academic talks about that. Like, there's plenty of books about the oral histories written by the people on the island, but for the most part, on mainland U.S., nobody knows that these camps existed. They had no clue that the U.S. put, indigenous civilians who weren't involved really in the battle. It was between the Japanese and the U.S. So here was this group that just got caught in the middle. They have no clue that we put them into internment camps. So that was kind of how I got, spurred into this. Well, and then internment in general has always been an interest of mine as just a topic. I was a criminal justice major originally, so it's just the theory behind internment, and does it help or hurt the people, and how it helps or hurts the people. So it's just kind of snowballed into this interest of internment camps in the Pacific.
So, okay, since you made that statement, I have to ask, looking at other internment or holding camps around the nation and around the world, how does our civilian camps, how is it similar and how is it different? What are some of the things that stand out?
It really is kind of its own thing, because in every other internment camp, especially in World War II in the European theater, it's usually seen as a concentration camp, which to me denotes very negative thoughts of death camps.
Yes.
And so, and then on the U.S. side with the Japanese internment camps that the U.S. put their own Japanese civilians into, it kind of falls a little away and more into like a refugee camp kind of a thing, where there was nowhere else to go, so they put them in here, but then even after they weren't needed to be in the camps, they still were. So it's kind of this weird, is it a refugee camp? Is it an internment camp? Where they still weren't allowed to leave, but the only reason was, for their safety, or the fact that there was nowhere else to go. So it's really interesting, and I haven't really read anything quite yet that's exactly like it. So that's what interests me specifically, is that it is its own, I guess, type of camp. And that's one of the questions we do kind of want to address, is how people perceive it. Like, was it terrible? Was it awful like a concentration camp? Was it more like a refugee camp where it was like, oh, I'm so glad I'm here and safe? Or was it just kind of, I was here and I wasn't allowed to leave? So we're really interested in people's own opinions on what it really was.
Well, as we mentioned, you're hoping to line up a number of interviews while you're here, and people can contact you either through Genevieve or through Fred.
Right, and the Northern Marianas Humanities Council, if you want to call them and say that you want to make an appointment with them. And then I have my own phone number on the island. It's 670-783-2072.
One more time.
Oh, sorry, one more time. 670-783-2072. And that's my personal number. You can usually get a hold of me pretty much day or night, or just leave a message, and we'll get back to you about setting up an appointment to talk. And I'll be here through July 30th for my research, and then we have another project going on until the 14th of August, but we can probably make it work where I can come by and talk if somebody, hears this and then forgets to contact me, and then it's like August 7th.
Thinks about it, decides they want to participate. Right. Well, we'll be back with more after this break.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizu'us ma'asi, olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half Hour. Joining us now in the second half of the show is Field Assistant Madeleine Roth. Madeleine, welcome to your Humanities Half Hour.
Thank you so much.
So tell us, what is your part in this project?
So I'm another graduate student at East Carolina University, and I'm here to help Steph in whatever capacity that she needs, but mostly I'm here to provide a sort of assistance with our field operations.
And it sounds like you guys are really busy.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned a little bit about this neighborhood survey, and do I understand correctly you're looking at maybe gathering photos, or, I mean, it's more than just asking questions.
Right, yeah. We're hoping to first talk to families and people that live in the original houses that still stand in the Chalankanoa area that they were living in. So we're trying to take photographs of the houses and to see how they may have changed through time. And then we're also asking people if they've ever found anything in their backyard when they were like gardening or digging. There's a kind of new archaeological phase going on where people are starting to get interested in what they find in their backyard and how it can tell you about the area that it's in. And since the camps were completely developed over, this could provide some interesting context of what historically could be found in that area, which might open up more fieldwork for us later on if we decided to do a full archaeological survey. So we're trying to find things that might have been from the camp still in people's backyards. And we're starting with houses that were still there that we know have not been changed through time.
Yeah, and that's actually really incredible. I always find that fascinating to think that, they're still living in those houses that have been there since Japanese times.
Yeah, we actually didn't know about that until last time we were here in Saipan, and someone mentioned it off the cuff, and I kind of had a record scratch moment where I was like, oh my gosh, really? And the same family still live in them, so that was pretty amazing to me. So I would definitely love to talk to them as well, especially about their, not only their experiences, but also just what could be in their backyard.
Mm-hmm. So, Madeleine, how did you come to be interested in this area of study or get sucked into doing this particular project?
It's been a really sort of amazing experience. Our professor, Dr. Jennifer McKinnon, who I know has been on the show before.
Yeah, she's one of our regular favorite guests.
She's been working in Saipan for over a decade now, and just is in other places across the Pacific. And so I started doing some research for her, looking at some different other battles, I should say, in the Pacific. We did some research on Palau, on the island of Peleliu. I did some research on Battle of Midway, and then sort of from there did some other things with Tinian, too, in the battle. And so there was an opportunity for us to come this summer, so we were here earlier, to look sort of at the offshore heritage with other students from East Carolina University. And Steph, when we were in the planning phase, had put together her project and her research, and had offered if I wanted to come and sort of look at this different aspect of the battle in terms of not necessarily the battle itself, but the aftermath, and especially the experiences of the Chamorro and Carolinian people following the battle. And it just sounded like an awesome opportunity and something that's pretty special in terms of both subject matter and the fact that we could have community participants and involvement.
What is it you guys hope to do with your degrees when you attain them? What's your dream archaeology gig?
Mine actually is working. I like archaeology with a purpose. Just because of my criminal justice background, I like to help people. So, actually, the DPAA, with who we were with in May, I would love to work for them and have been wanting to for years. So, archaeology with a purpose.
How about you, Madeleine?
I come from sort of a cultural resource management background, and so that's something I'd really like to continue. It'd be sort of a dream job, is to work with resource management, because that way not only are you working with archaeological resources and studying and interpreting them, but it is really community-based and community-driven, and trying to find out what the stakeholders of this heritage are interested in and how to best preserve it.
Well, there's a recent revival, I would say, here in the Marianas related to maritime heritage, and talking about cultural resources, and that's also part of your grant. How does that tie in?
So this was originally kind of a problem, actually, with my thesis research is that I knew I really wanted to do the internment camps, and our program is technically maritime studies, and so I was like, oh, I kind of need a maritime angle on this. So talking with Dr. McKinnon, and she's like, well, you'll figure something out. And then I was just curious about how the maritime cultural heritage of this area, it is so important to the Chamorro and the Carolinian groups, and how it survived through time. So we're interested in how it was impacted by internment in the camp. So boating and fishing are big. Whether or not it was, for subsistence, and whether they could go back to where they always were fishing before, like how that kind of stopped. Or maybe it didn't stop. Maybe they were able to do, whatever they wanted as long as they had guards escorting them outside. But boating, definitely, boating, at least for the Carolinians, definitely for the Carolinians and the Chamorro, how they weren't able to really go out in their boats. Were they able to go out in their boats? These are things that isn't talked about in the oral histories or any of the military documents that I've scanned through.
Well, I was going to ask you, what are your preliminary findings? But it sounds like, as you said, that not much has been said about it.
Right, and they'll say it, or there'll be a picture of girls with holding fish while they're coming from somewhere, but there's no background text on it. It's not anything that people have really just talked about. We knew it was for subsistence only, usually because the Okinawans and the Japanese were doing the commercial fishing at the time, and there's plenty in the military documents about having escorts for the Japanese and Okinawan commercial fisheries, but not anything for the indigenous.
I think it's a very valid question because, our sailing traditions was hugely impacted under the Spanish colonialization when they basically banned us using canoes. And so I think, and especially now with the revival that's going on and the interest in the teaching, it's a great great timing to look into that.
Yeah, that's what it seems like so far, is that with, even with how it was impacted, it did survive through, all of these administrative changeovers. And I think that's fascinating that you are still reviving it now.
So we mentioned that the Humanities Council is providing a partial grant, but who are your other partners in this project?
East Carolina University is definitely, the one who has been trying to get me, come out here and everything. And the Humanities Council, it is actually a community grant, like a full grant, so we're completely funded by them. Otherwise, I would still be coming out here, but it'd be on my own dime, and I'd be couch surfing and, having to work my way around. I think just ECU and another Humanities.
And what will you be doing with your research when you're done?
Like I said before, this is my thesis research, so there will be a complete thesis, which, to everybody else will probably be long and hard to read. So we're also taking everything that we've gathered, and we're creating an ebook, and the ebook will be available free for everybody to access it who has anything online. We'll be including the oral histories we've taken. There will be a brief historic overview in the beginning that'll be written by me, but then everything else is the oral histories that we've recorded. And then we're also hoping to make a GIS story map, and story maps are a really great tool because especially like for educational purposes, it's very interactive. It'll be like a map of the island, and you can click on any part of it, and things will pop up about the camps and the stockades that they were kept in before the camps and other important aspects, maybe from the Battle of Saipan. And there will also still be parts of the oral history interviews on them, but it's very interactive, and it's great for, educational purposes and people just playing around on the computer. So getting people as many ways as possible to learn about this.
Well, we're so grateful that people with your expertise come and help us, document the history and learn more and share more among ourselves. And since this isn't necessarily your first time to the Marianas, I want to ask you from an archaeological perspective, what are your thoughts on our history keeping and the state of archaeology and community awareness and sensitivity to these things here in the Marianas?
It seems like the communities so far have, at least recently, been, like you said, revamped. Like there's been a revitalization effort of trying to get, the maritime cultural heritage recorded. People want to talk, people want to record their histories, and it seems like, especially with ancient Chamorro as well, that is very respected around here. So it's pretty great so far. We've had some, talks with people at HBO and the Humanities Council, and at least it seems like it's getting better. Like, it's definitely not going downhill.
Growing, maybe.
Right, exactly.
Well, I want to give you both an opportunity for some final thoughts before we go. Madeleine.
I guess sort of linking with what Steph just said and sort of coming back to the final sort of project details is that people have just been so wonderful in what they're willing to share and what they like to share, and there's just such a wealth of information in the community, and that's why we're here, is to try and take that knowledge that's held and be able to share it sort of outside the borders of Saipan with the digital media and the book and everything. And so I think so far the community support's been amazing, and it's just been really wonderful to sort of see that outpouring of stories and of experiences.
I really hope maybe some of the people who haven't shared their stories will reach out and contact you guys. Your thoughts?
Yeah, kind of going off of that and what Maddie said is that so far the community has taken their own heritage in their hands, and they've been recording it. But you, like me, I can only do so much to get people to contribute. Like, I can only write down what I know. So if people would be more willing to share the stories that haven't been told, to make sure that those stories have passed down to the next generation, it's important to keep that knowledge going. And like I said, they've been great with sharing, but just any little cooperation, anything that people want to give would be amazing, because community archaeology is, done for the people, by the people, and we need that by the people.
I just want to ask, for those that maybe might be more interested in sharing in Chamorro or Carolinian versus English, would they be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We have Fred Camacho on board, and he speaks Chamorro, and Genevieve Cabrera, she's also, I believe, speaks Chamorro.
Yes.
Carolinian, we might be able to find somebody that we just need to, if anyone wants to volunteer, we can definitely do that. But we will find ways, we want to make this as easy as possible to get those stories out, so I'll, bend over backwards to make sure it's happened, that people are comfortable, not only sharing, but with us as people as well,
So give us your contacts one more time.
Sure. My direct number is 670-783-2072. Like I said, that's my direct line. And if you want to call the Humanities Council, they will also pass along the message to me that you want to get involved.
All right. Well, our guests today have been Project Director Stephanie Soder and Field Assistant Madeleine Roth, talking about their project to document the experience of Chamorros and Carolinians in the civilian camps established by the U.S. military here in Saipan during and after World War II. Ladies, thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.